Captain Jinho's hands were steady as he watched the massive transmission array spin in the darkness of space. For 3 long months, Earth's best engineers and scientists had worked around the clock to build this moment. The beacon was humanity's first real attempt to talk to the alien civilizations they knew were out there somewhere among the stars. The bridge of the Earth Defense Station buzzed with quiet activity. Lieutenant Mira sat at her control station, her eyes never leaving the green lights that showed their signal was broadcasting strong and clear across the galaxy. She had volunteered for this mission, knowing it might be humanity's last chance to warn anyone who would listen. Signals holding steady. "Sir?" Mira called out, her voice calm, despite the weight of what they were doing. The council ships should be picking this up within the hour. She had studied the alien communication patterns for months, learning how their technology worked and when their ships would be in range to receive Earth's message. The message itself was unlike anything humans had ever sent before. It wasn't asking for help or begging for rescue, like so many distress signals did. Instead, Earth was trying to warn the entire galaxy about something terrible that was coming their way. Something that made even a dangerous planet like Earth look safe by comparison. The automatic doors to the bridge slid open with a soft hiss, and Commander Tyke walked in. His weathered face showed the stress of the past 2 years. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights spent studying reports from the outer edges of known space. His military uniform was neat as always, but Jin could see the tension in his shoulders. "Intel confirms it," Tyke said, his voice grim as he approached the captain's chair. 3 more systems went dark in the outer reach. "The Devourers are moving faster than we thought they would." He held a tablet showing the latest reports from their deep space monitoring stations. Red dots marked the locations where entire solar systems had simply vanished from all communication. Jinho nodded slowly, processing this new information. Humanity had been tracking what they called the mechanical plague for 2 full years now. It all started when their deep space exploration probes detected something wrong in the Kepler sector. Whole colonies that had been sending regular signals suddenly went quiet. When the probes got closer to investigate, they found something that chilled everyone who saw the footage. The Kepler colonies weren't just destroyed, they were completely consumed, broken down into basic materials by massive swarms of mechanical creatures that seemed to eat everything in their path. Planets, space stations, ships, people, everything became raw materials for these machines to build more of themselves, while the rest of the galaxy continued their normal lives. Completely unaware of the approaching threat, Earth's military had been working day and night to prepare for war. They studied the enemy, learned their patterns, and built weapons designed specifically to fight something that had never been seen before in galactic history. Lieutenant Mira glanced up from her console, worry clear in her voice. "Think they'll actually respond to primitives from a quarantine world?" She knew that most alien civilizations considered Earth to be too dangerous for normal contact. Humans were seen as violent and unpredictable, better left alone on their deadly planet. Commander Tyke's hand moved to check his sidearm, a habit he had developed during the long months of preparation. "They will respond," he said with quiet confidence, "because whether they like it or not, we're about to become their only hope of survival." The sleek alien vessel dropped out of hyperspace with a flash of blue light, its elegant curves and peaceful design marking it clearly as a diplomatic ship. Ambassador Zethkri had made this journey expecting to find a primitive world, barely capable of space travel. What his sensors showed him instead made his blood run cold. Earth's solar system had been transformed into the most heavily fortified military installation he had ever seen. Massive defense platforms floated in perfect formation around each planet, their weapon arrays pointed outward toward deep space. Patrol fleets of human warships moved in coordinated patterns, their hulls bristling with armaments that looked nothing like the defensive weapons most civilized species used. Navigation Officer Quinn sat at her station, her alien features pale as she read the sensor data streaming across her screens. She had served on diplomatic missions to dozens of worlds, but never had she encountered anything like this. "By the void," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of their ship's engines. "They've turned their entire star system into a fortress." The weapon signatures alone were enough to make her hands shake. These weren't the elegant energy shields and non-lethal deterrents that protected most civilized worlds. These were brutal, efficient killing machines designed for one purpose: destroying anything that came too close without permission. Before Zethkri could fully process what his sensors were telling him, the ship's communication system crackled to life with a transmission that carried the authority of someone clearly used to being obeyed. The voice was human, female, and completely without fear, despite speaking to an alien vessel that could have been carrying anything from traders to invaders. "Alien vessel. This is Admiral Yuna of Earth Defense Command," the voice said with military precision. "We've been expecting you. Follow the designated flight path that's being transmitted to your navigation systems. Any deviation from this path will be considered a hostile action and responded to accordingly." Zethkri felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. In his decades of diplomatic service, he had never been given orders by the species he was supposed to be making contact with. Usually, first contact followed careful protocols developed over centuries of peaceful interaction. The contacted species would be cautious, curious, perhaps even grateful for the attention from the wider galactic community. These humans were treating him like a potential threat, while simultaneously demonstrating that they had been monitoring galactic communications well enough to expect his arrival. The implications were staggering. Not only were these supposed primitives more advanced than anyone had realized, but they were also clearly prepared for conflict on a scale that made his diplomatic training seem laughably inadequate. Within hours of following the mandatory flight path through layers of automated defense systems, Zethkri found himself transported to Earth's primary military command station. The sterile military briefing room was unlike any diplomatic meeting space he had ever experienced. Instead of comfortable seating and refreshments designed to put visitors at ease, there were tactical displays, weapon schematics, and star charts, marked with disturbing annotations about enemy movement patterns. Admiral Yuna stood waiting for him, her human features sharp and focused. Beside her, General Suna reviewed data on a portable device, his expression grim. Neither officer showed any of the nervousness or excitement that most species displayed during first contact. Instead, they looked like military professionals preparing for a difficult briefing about an ongoing crisis. "You received our warning," Admiral Yuna stated, her tone suggesting this was a fact rather than a question. There was no diplomatic pleasantry, no attempt to make their guest comfortable. She spoke with the directness of someone who had more important things to worry about than hurt feelings. "The Devourers have consumed the entire Hydra arm and are moving toward the core systems where your people live. Your council has maybe 6 months before they reach inhabited space." Zethkri struggled to process what he was hearing. The Hydra arm contained dozens of solar systems, billions of lives, entire civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. If what she was saying was true, then the threat was far worse than anything the Council had imagined. But how could these isolated humans possibly know about events happening thousands of light years away? How could primitives possibly know about Zethkri began, falling back on the standard diplomatic assumption that Earth was a backwards world with limited technology. General Suna looked up from his device, and his smile was the most unsettling thing Zethkri had ever seen. It wasn't cruel or mocking, but it carried the confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous they were and didn't mind if others found out. "Primitives?" he asked, his tone almost amused. "We've been hunting these things for 2 years, while your council was holding committee meetings. Would you like to see what we've learned?" The lights in the briefing room dimmed as General Suna activated the holographic display system. What appeared in the center of the room made Ambassador Zethkri take an involuntary step backward. The three-dimensional image showed something that belonged in the worst nightmares of every living species in the galaxy. Writhing masses of metallic tentacles and processing units moved across the display like a living ocean of destruction. Each individual machine was the size of a small building, but they moved together in perfect coordination, flowing over planets like a mechanical plague. The footage showed them literally eating everything in their path: cities, forests, oceans. Even the bedrock of entire continents disappeared into their grinding maws. Ambassador Zethkri felt his secondary hearts skip several beats as the horrifying footage continued. He watched entire civilizations vanish in a matter of hours, their populations and all traces of their existence converted into raw materials that the machines immediately used to build more of themselves. "We intercepted a scout swarm 18 months ago," Captain Doyan explained calmly, as if he was discussing routine military exercises rather than an encounter with galaxy-ending horror. As Earth's leading xenobiology specialist, he had spent his career studying alien life forms, but nothing had prepared him for machines that defied every natural law. Through careful planning and significant sacrifice, we managed to capture several units intact for study. Zethkri's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Capture?" he stammered, unable to believe what he was hearing. "These machines are specifically designed to consume all organic matter they encounter. Their programming makes them seek out and destroy any form of biological life. How could you possibly capture them without being consumed yourselves?" Admiral Yuna's response was delivered with the same casual tone she might use to discuss the weather. "Nuclear fire and electromagnetic pulse weapons," she said simply. "Standard Deathworld tactics that we've been perfecting for generations. We've been reverse engineering their technology ever since that first encounter." The briefing room suddenly filled with dozens of holographic schematics, technical diagrams, and detailed analysis reports. Every surface showed different aspects of the devoured technology: their internal structure, power systems, communication methods, and most importantly, their weaknesses. What horrified Zethkri wasn't just the enemy's incredible capabilities, but the cold, clinical way humanity had analyzed and cataloged every detail. Lieutenant Hannah stepped forward and activated another section of the display. Her fingers moved expertly across the control interface, calling up diagrams that showed the mechanical swarm's organizational structure. They operate using quantum entanglement networks for instantaneous communication across vast distances, she explained with the precision of someone who had spent months studying captured enemy technology. "But we've discovered that if you disrupt their command nodes at precisely the right moment, entire swarms go dormant and stop functioning. We've identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in their network architecture." The display showed tactical simulations of human forces exploiting these weaknesses, turning the Devourer's own coordination against them. Each simulation ended with massive swarms of the mechanical monsters floating dead in space, their quantum networks severed by precisely targeted human attacks. General Suna leaned back in his chair, his expression showing a mixture of professional satisfaction and grim determination. "While your species and the rest of the Council spent the last 2 years hiding behind energy shields and diplomatic immunity protocols, we were out there learning how to kill these things." The room fell silent as the full implications became clear. Zethkri looked around at the human officers, seeing them with completely new eyes. They weren't asking for the Council's help or begging for protection from the approaching threat. Instead, they were calmly offering to share their expertise in warfare with species that had considered them primitive savages. The terrifying realization hit him. Like a physical blow, humanity wasn't asking for the galaxy's help. They were offering theirs. The transport shuttle, carrying Ambassador Zethkri, approached Earth's orbital shipyards. And what he saw through the viewport made him question everything he thought he knew about spacecraft construction. Massive structures stretched 4 kilometers in every direction, filled with vessels that looked more like flying weapons than traditional starships. The orbital shipyards above Earth completely defied everything Zethkri had learned about proper space engineering during his decades of diplomatic service, where most civilized species built elegant ships focused on exploration and peaceful contact. Human vessels looked like flying fortresses designed for one purpose: war. Every surface bristled with weapon systems that clearly violated multiple Council safety protocols established over centuries of peaceful spacefaring. Captain Yunha met them at the docking bay, her confident stride showing she was completely at home in this environment of controlled chaos. Engineers and construction workers moved with practiced efficiency around them, assembling weapons of war that would have been considered too dangerous for civilian construction zones on any other world. "Impressive, isn't it?" Captain Yuna asked, with obvious pride, as she guided the alien delegation through the massive construction bay. The sound of welding torches and heavy machinery filled the air around them. The Soul's Wrath, our newest Dreadnought-class vessel. The armor plating is made from compressed asteroid materials that we mine from the belt beyond Mars. And those fusion cannons you see being installed have enough power to crack small moons. Navigation Officer Quinn studied her portable scanner, her alien features growing pale as she read the technical specifications streaming across her screen. The power readings alone were beyond anything she had ever encountered, and the structural design seemed to ignore basic principles of crew safety that every other species considered sacred. "This is complete madness," Quinn whispered, her voice barely audible over the industrial noise surrounding them. "These ships are specifically designed for ramming attacks against enemy vessels. The impact forces from collisions at these speeds would kill your crews instantly. No living being could survive forces like that." Captain Yuna's response came with a grin that was distinctly predatory. The expression of someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of warfare. "That's assuming we plan to survive the encounter," she said with casual acceptance of what should have been unthinkable. "Sometimes completing the mission successfully matters more than bringing the crew home alive." As they continued their tours through the shipyard, they passed massive weapons foundries where human workers casually handled materials that would require full hazmat protocols and protective equipment on any civilized world. The background radiation levels from the exotic materials being processed would kill most alien species within hours of exposure. But the human workers treated these deadly conditions as nothing more than minor workplace hazards. Zethkri watched in fascination and horror as technicians assembled torpedo warheads, while being exposed to energy signatures that would have triggered emergency evacuations on Council worlds. "Your people evolved in hell," he observed, finally understanding why Earth had been classified as a quarantine zone. Commander Inwu looked up from overseeing the installation of torpedo arrays that could level entire city districts. His expression was matter-of-fact as he corrected the alien ambassador. "We evolved to make hell our weapon," he said simply. "And now we're going to teach the rest of the galaxy exactly why Deathworlders exist in the first place." Throughout the massive shipyard complex, construction crews worked around the clock to complete vessels designed for a type of warfare that peaceful species had never imagined. Admiral Yuna's voice echoed through the facility over the communication system, reaching every worker and supervisor. "All vessels, prepare for immediate departure. The enemy won't wait for us to finish being civilized." The assembly point in deep space presented a sight that no one in galactic history had ever witnessed before. Hundreds of vessels from dozens of different species floated in formation, creating the largest combined military force the galaxy had ever seen. The combined fleet was a fascinating study in contrasts that told the story of two completely different approaches to space travel and warfare. The Council's contribution consisted of sleek exploration vessels with elegant curves and peaceful designs, their hulls gleaming with the polished perfection that came from centuries of diplomatic missions and scientific research. These ships had been hastily retrofitted with human weapon systems that looked completely out of place on their graceful frames. Fusion cannons and missile arrays had been bolted onto vessels that were originally designed for cultural exchanges and peaceful first contact missions. Surrounding these modified diplomatic ships were Earth's angular warships that looked like flying weapons, platforms built by a species that had never known true peace. Every line and surface was designed for maximum combat effectiveness, with no wasted space or decorative elements. These vessels existed for one purpose: to destroy anything that threatened humanity's survival. Ambassador Zethkri stood on the bridge of his diplomatic cruiser, watching through the main viewport as human technicians swarmed over his ships, HULL, installing weapons systems that violated every principle of peaceful space exploration he had ever learned. "I still cannot believe the Council actually authorized this alliance," he muttered, his voice filled with disbelief at the desperate decision that had brought them to this point. Admiral Yuna's response came through the communication channel. From the command deck of the Bizon's Fury, her flagship that served as the nerve center for the entire human fleet. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the intelligence reports and understood exactly what they were facing. "Your species faces complete extinction within 6 months," she replied with brutal honesty. Desperate times like these required Deathworld solutions that civilized species would never consider under normal circumstances. Throughout the massive fleet, human instructors were conducting what they politely called tactical orientation sessions for the alien crews, who would be fighting alongside them. Lieutenant Borum had set up training areas where she demonstrated boarding techniques to horrified alien officers, who had never imagined that space combat could involve actually entering enemy vessels. While they were still fighting back, on another ship, Sergeant Kyung was teaching basic demolitions techniques, using live explosives that made his alien students flinch with every controlled detonation. The aliens watched in terror as he casually handled materials that could vaporize entire sections of their ships, treating deadly weapons like routine tools. The fleet-wide communication system crackled to life. As Captain Yeho made an announcement that would have been considered insane by any civilized military force, "All crew members need to remember the fundamental principle of this mission." His voice echoed through hundreds of ships. "Every ship in this fleet is expendable. Every crew member is expendable. Only completing the mission successfully matters." The alien crews throughout the fleet exchanged terrified glances, finally beginning to understand why the Council had classified Earth as a quarantine world that should be avoided at all costs. These humans weren't just soldiers following orders, they were evolved weapons, shaped by generations of survival on a planet that tried to kill everything living on it. Commander Ryong coordinated the final preparations from the human fleet's tactical center, his voice calm and professional, as he reported their readiness status. "All human vessels report ready for combat operations. The alien ships, equipped with our weapons, well, they'll learn what they need to know when the shooting starts." As the massive fleet prepared to enter hyperspace and begin their journey toward the approaching enemy, Zethkri found himself wondering if they were heading out to save the galaxy from one nightmare, or if they were about to unleash a different kind of horror on the universe. The ship sailed through space for 3 long weeks toward the edge of their galaxy. During this time, something strange happened that shocked all the alien crew members. Every single day, the human soldiers practiced what they called combat readiness drills. These weren't ordinary practice sessions. They were intense, brutal training exercises that prepared them for the worst possible situations. The alien officers couldn't believe what they were hearing during the morning meetings. Colonel Han stood up and calmly announced something that made everyone's blood run cold. "We expect that 70% of us might not survive this mission," he said in a matter-of-fact tone. The room fell completely silent. The alien representatives sat there with their mouths open, unable to process how humans could discuss their own deaths so casually. Captain Minjay decided to use the travel time wisely. She started teaching mixed groups of humans and aliens what she cheerfully called aggressive negotiations. This was actually combat training disguised with a friendly name. She showed the alien crew members how to turn their everyday work tools into deadly weapons. The aliens were scientists, explorers, and engineers. They had mining equipment, life support systems, and research tools. Minjay taught them how all of these peaceful devices could become instruments of war if needed. "See these mining lasers you use to cut through rocks?" she said with a bright smile to a group of very nervous alien geologists. "These can easily become weapons against enemy soldiers. You just need to change the frequency settings and adjust how wide the beam spreads." The alien scientists looked horrified. They had spent their entire careers using these tools to discover new worlds and gather knowledge. Now, they were learning how to use them to hurt others. As their ship got closer and closer to their destination, something remarkable happened to the human crews. They seemed to become more energetic and excited. Instead of being scared about the dangerous mission ahead, they appeared to be looking forward to it. The humans talked about death and dying, as if they were discussing the weather. They made jokes about how impossible their chances of success were. Most disturbing of all, they showed genuine excitement about the violent battles that were coming. This behavior deeply troubled their alien companions. Quinn, one of the alien officers, pulled Zethkri aside for a private conversation. "This isn't normal," Quinn whispered, looking worried. "No intelligent species should be this comfortable with warfare and violence. It goes against everything we understand about civilized behavior." Zethkri watched Captain Suyang demonstrating hand-to-hand combat techniques to a mixed group of soldiers. The captain was showing them how to fight enemies in close quarters, without any weapons except their bare hands. The moves looked brutal and efficient. "Maybe you're right that it isn't natural," Zethkri replied thoughtfully. "But maybe that's exactly why they're our only chance of winning this war." Finally, their long journey was almost over. As they approached the empty void between galaxies, their long-range sensors started picking up mechanical signals. These weren't friendly signals from other exploration ships. These were the electronic signatures of Devourer advanced scouts. The moment everyone had been dreading finally arrived. The first Devourer scouts came into view, and they were absolutely terrifying to look at. These weren't anything like the ships that most species built. Instead, they looked like giant mechanical monsters made of writhing metal tentacles and massive processing units. Each scout was enormous, roughly the size of an entire city district, back on Earth. When the alien crew members saw these mechanical beasts through their viewing screens, they completely froze up. Fear took over their bodies and minds. Many of them had never seen anything so frightening in their entire lives. Some started shaking, others couldn't even speak. The sight of these unnatural war machines was enough to paralyze even the bravest alien warriors. But the human ships reacted in a completely different way. Instead of freezing in terror, they immediately shifted into attack formations. It was like watching a pack of wolves suddenly spot their prey. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, each ship taking its assigned position in a coordinated battle plan. They had rehearsed countless times. Admiral Yuna's voice came through the communication system, clear and commanding. "All units, this is Admiral Yuna. The rules of engagement are very simple today. Kill everything that moves out there, and then we'll recycle whatever pieces are left over." Captain Ji-hoon commanded a destroyer ship called the Daegu's Vengeance. Without any hesitation, he led his vessel straight into the heart of the mechanical swarm. To any logical observer, this looked like a suicide mission. Flying directly into the center of enemy forces should have meant certain death for everyone on board. But what happened next was completely unexpected. Instead of being destroyed, Captain Jihoon's ship turned the battle into what looked like a perfectly executed training exercise. The human weapon systems began tearing through enemy units with surgical precision. Every shot hit exactly where it was supposed to hit. Every maneuver was perfectly timed and calculated. Lieutenant Soyang's voice came through the battle communications, sharing vital tactical information with the other ships. "Target their quantum nodes," she transmitted clearly. "If you disrupt their network connections, they'll go dormant and stop functioning." The alien crews watching this battle couldn't believe what they were seeing. The humans weren't just randomly attacking the enemy scouts. They were systematically taking them apart piece by piece. Every single attack was carefully calculated to cause maximum damage. Every maneuver was specifically designed to exploit weaknesses that somehow the humans had identified just by looking at these alien machines. Quinn, one of the alien officers, made an observation that sent chills down everyone's spine. "They're not just fighting these things," he said quietly. "They're hunting them." Commander Giwan's voice soon crackled across all communication channels with an update that amazed everyone. "Enemy scouts have been completely neutralized. All salvage teams, move in immediately. We need to collect those components for intelligence gathering." Within just a few hours, something incredible had happened. The humans had not only completely defeated the Devourer scouts, but they were already busy taking apart the wreckage. They wanted to study every piece of technology they could find to gain tactical advantages for future battles. Zethkri watched this entire process and suddenly understood something important. This was exactly how apex predators were supposed to behave in the wild, however. Everyone knew that the real battle was still waiting for them. Somewhere ahead, the sight that greeted them next was beyond anyone's worst nightmares. The main Devourer fleet stretched across space like a perfectly organized wall of death. There were millions upon millions of mechanical units, each one arranged in absolutely perfect formation. Every single unit was massive, roughly the size of a battleship that would normally carry thousands of crew members. When the combined Allied fleet looked at this enormous enemy force, they felt completely overwhelmed. Their own ships seemed tiny and pathetic in comparison. It was like bringing a handful of stones to fight against a mountain. "Admiral," Yuna's voice came through the communication system with clear, precise orders. "All Council vessels, maintain your defensive positions and stay back. Human ships, execute Deathworld Protocol 7 immediately." Zethkri had been working with humans for weeks now, but he had never heard anyone mention Protocol 7 before. As he watched what happened next, pure horror filled his entire being. Half of the human fleet began accelerating at maximum speed, directly toward the enemy formation. They weren't trying to find a safe approach or looking for weak spots. They were heading straight into certain death at ramming speed. "They're committing suicide," Zethkri gasped, unable to believe what he was seeing. This wasn't strategy or tactics. This was madness. Captain Mina, who was stationed at the tactical control center, looked completely calm as she responded. "No, they're not committing suicide," she said matter-of-factly. "They're creating opportunities for the rest of us." What happened next was both brilliant and terrifying at the same time. The sacrificial ships didn't just crash randomly into the enemy formation. Instead, they detonated their fusion reactor cores at precisely calculated moments. The explosions created massive gaps in the Devourer formation that had been arranged so perfectly. The remaining human fleet immediately took advantage of these openings and attacked ruthlessly through the weakened areas. Colonel Hines' voice transmitted across all communication channels as her ship dove directly into the mechanical chaos. "All crews, remember everything we taught you during training," she said calmly. "Pain is only temporary, but extinction lasts forever." Even as their ships were being destroyed around them, human boarding pods kept launching from the dying vessels. These small pods carried demolition teams, whose job was to get inside the Devourer command nodes and destroy them from within. The human soldiers were literally using their own deaths as weapons against the enemy. The alien crews watching this battle realized they were witnessing something that had never happened before in galactic history. They were seeing a species that had somehow learned to weaponize martyrdom itself. The humans had turned self-sacrifice into a military strategy. 60% casualties and rising, reported the tactical officer aboard Zethkri's ship. The numbers were horrifying. More than half of the human fleet was already destroyed or severely damaged. But when the remaining human commanders received these casualty reports, they acknowledged the massive losses with the same calm tone they might use to discuss tomorrow's weather forecast. Death and destruction were just normal parts of their battle plan. The aliens couldn't understand how any species could remain so composed while watching their own people die in such large numbers. The battlefield was finally quiet, where the massive Devourer fleet had once dominated space with its terrifying geometric precision. Now only floating wreckage remained. The enemy command networks had been completely disrupted by strikes that were so precisely targeted that only human tactical thinking could have planned them. No other species in the galaxy would have thought to attack in such a calculated yet seemingly reckless way. But the price of this victory was absolutely staggering. Nearly 3/4 of the human vessels had been completely destroyed during the battle. Ships that had carried thousands of brave crew members were now nothing more than twisted metal drifting through space. The human fleet that had entered this battle was now reduced to just a handful of damaged survivors. Admiral Yuna's voice came through the communication system from her heavily damaged flagship. The ship was barely holding together, with hull breaches and system failures throughout. Mission accomplished, she reported in the same calm, professional tone she had used throughout the entire battle. Around her, the surviving crew members continued performing their duties, despite suffering injuries that would have completely incapacitated members of any other species. As the surviving ships slowly limped back toward civilized space, the alien crew members tried to process everything they had just witnessed. They had seen things that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare, survival, and what it meant to be intelligent beings in the universe. Captain Young-ho was conducting casualty reports with the same methodical precision and attention to detail that he had used for battle planning. He read through lists of the dead and wounded as if he were reviewing supply inventories. There was no emotion in his voice, no grief for the massive losses his people had suffered. Zethkri opened a communication channel to transmit his report back to the Galactic Council. "The galaxy is safe from the Devourer threat," he said carefully. "But we need to have serious discussions about the implications of what happened here." The truth was complicated and frightening. Humanity had indeed saved them all from certain destruction. Without human intervention, every civilized world in the galaxy would have been consumed by the mechanical horrors. But in the process of saving everyone, humans had revealed themselves as something far more terrifying than any external threat they had just defeated. These weren't just survivors who had gotten lucky on a dangerous planet. They were evil, most efficient and deadly killing machines, barely contained by a thin layer of what they called civilization. They had turned warfare into an art form, and death into a strategic tool. Quinn, still trying to understand what he had witnessed, asked a question that was weighing on everyone's mind. What happens now? How do we move forward after this? Lieutenant Yunji was busy tending to the wounded with the characteristic efficiency that humans brought to everything they did. She looked up from her medical duties just long enough to give an answer that sent chills through everyone who heard it. "Now we go home and prepare for the next war," she said simply. "There's always a next war somewhere." As Earth finally came into view after their long journey home, Zethkri realized something that would change galactic politics forever. The galaxy's greatest defenders were also potentially its greatest threat. Somewhere out there in the outer Rim territories, these Deathworld survivors were already planning for conflicts that hadn't even been imagined yet. The stars were safe for now. But the peace would never be the same again.